You can
Sir,
start right
you can
now.
start now.
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back again before the Indore Study Circle. And I want to extend a very warm welcome to Dr. Shailesh Shirali, who has very kindly accepted our invitation and is with us today. Shailesh ji is going to talk on violence. Why is peace on earth so difficult to find? It's a very interesting topic. Uh, Shailesh ji needs no introduction in Krishnamurti Circle anywhere. But for those of us who have joined for the first time or new to Indore Study Circle, I'll briefly introduce Shailesh ji. Dr. Shailesh Shirali is presently working as Secretary and Director of the Sahyadri Education Center, Krishnamurti Foundation, India. Dr. Shirali has been associated with K5 for more than 3 decades in different roles. He started as a teacher of mathematics in the Shivali School and also worked as principal of RV School for many years. And then he shifted to Sahyadri School as the principal, and he has been there for quite a few years now. He is a renowned mathematician and has written a number of books on mathematics for school children. He is editor of a mathematical magazine at Right Angles, published by Azim Premji University. Shailesh is also a senior trustee of the KFI, and it's our pleasure to welcome him. And I'm very, very thankful that he is with us today. So Shailesh ji, the format is going to be that you will speak for about 40-45 minutes, followed by question answers for another 40-45 minutes. So the floor is yours now. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Well, as I was walking here to my office this morning, as you know, I am in Sahyadri School, and it is now, the monsoon has just gotten over, and it's the interval between monsoon and winter. Utterly beautiful weather, blue, clear sky, and everywhere it's looking so green and lush. And in a setting like this, it seems so incredible to even imagine that there could be wars, there could be violence, there could be tremendous conflict going on among human beings in so many parts of the world. So it's a question which I think which is going to confound almost anybody, because violence is a very deep issue, and its causes lie very deep within us. And I think our conditioning, our habits are such that it becomes difficult to go beyond a certain point. So what I'm going to do right now, what I'm going to try to do, is to give a certain context of violence and try to explore why this situation has persisted. First of all, as they say, is peace merely the interval between two wars? And if you look at the verdict of history, it seems as though that is the case. If you look at, there seems to be almost a certain kind of a cycle which operates. You see war, then there's tremendous destruction, killing, people get exhausted. Then there is talk of peace, brokering peace, then the rebuilding happens, and then slowly people get used to that. Unrest builds up. Again, people start preparing for war. Again, there are some conflicts or the other. And meanwhile, there's the arms trade going on. People are, companies are making big money out of the whole business of war. And again, the drums of war start beating all over again. It's almost like a cycle which goes on. And if you see our response to war, what we try to do, if at all there is war, we only believe in diplomacy. We try to argue that, okay, let's have some negotiation. You take this, I take this, let's agree on this. And it's all at the level of agreements and diplomacy, negotiation, peace treaties. If we know our history, we know that after the First World War, there was the Treaty of Versailles. And that itself was, in a way, set the tone for World War II, which was surely the most destructive war in existence ever. And then after World War II, the United Nations got set up. And we all know how effective, or rather how ineffective, the United Nations is. Not that it's doing nothing, but it doesn't seem to have the power, the capacity to actually stop conflict. Because there are thousands of ways in which conflict can continue without any of these agencies or organizations having any hope of doing anything. Because the cause of war is not at that level. You can't simply bring two parties to a table and hope to solve it. And let's look at the situation that is happening in the world. Now, last century probably in many ways was one of the most savage, the most violent ever. If you consider all that happened, particularly during the World War II, ending with the atom bomb and so on. And then following that, you have wars like the Vietnam War and so many genocides which took place. In India itself, genocides have taken place, the partition time and so on. So it may seem as if the last century was a terrible century and now we are somewhat better off. But that may be true in some statistical sense. But in a much deeper sense, perhaps the level of unrest, the level of conflict, the level of division has perhaps actually gone up from last century. And we are perhaps more deeply divided and more lost inwardly than ever before. So let's look around the world. You have the forces of fundamentalism at a very large scale, right? It's here in our own country, it's there in our neighbor, all the neighboring countries around us are showing sign, this, what can you say, the scourge of fundamentalism. Then nationalistic forces are becoming very strong. You have a country like China with a very resurgent nationalism. An arms race is beginning between yet again another arms race, this time between China and America. And then identity wars are taking place in numerous places. The whole demand for identity. And now we come to a slightly different aspect. You see, though the title of this talk seems to suggest that we're only talking about war, peace meaning the ending of war and so on. But actually, the problem of violence is much deeper than just war. It's also the war which is taking place at a micro level between human beings, between people, man and his neighbor, inside a person, the inward conflict. So we have to now look at this question of conflict much more widely, not merely in the sense of actual bombs being dropped and so on, but conflict in a much inner sense. So fundamentalism is of that kind. You have this phenomenon taking place today of echo chambers, of people getting locked into hearing only their own opinions thanks to social media. And you'll notice that the contact between one opinion group and another opinion group is extremely violent these days. Hate conversation has become like a routine on social media. All this is these are new phenomena in some senses which are taking place. Then you have at a different level, consumerism and entertainment, which is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. Demand for entertainment, demand for consumer products. And this is unleashing a different kind of war. It's a war on nature. And as a part of that, there is tremendous destruction of our natural resources, of our forests, animals, oceans, and so on. The problem of waste, the problem of environmental collapse. And another phenomenon which is taking place all over the world is the divide between rich and poor, which is becoming enormous in today's times. Perhaps it has never been so great. There are few billionaires who own unbelievable amounts of money, and then there is the poor class, which is also very, very large. So this is another kind of violence which perhaps is not generally categorized under the term violence, but there is a terrible violence about it. And then race problems are continuing, despite the fact that we have outlawed racial prejudice. We have outlawed caste prejudice in our own country, and yet it continues. All these are forms of violence, which it is a proof that by outlawing something, by passing legislation, we don't seem to get anywhere at all. Very little progress seems to happen. We have tremendous faith that if we pass a law, if the courts step into the problem, constitution, etc., we only think in those sorts of terms. So how does all this, how has all this come to pass? Now, here are a few points which I'd like to make. First of all, is the problem that we love power too much? Is power one of the crucial factors that we love power so much that we are never going to let go? And therefore, nations will hang on to power, political parties will hang on to power. Then there is identity politics of groups which are hanging on to power. So power is one very major factor which is there, and power, of course, rests inside us. It's not just a political kind of phenomenon. And just to quote one very famous statement which was made last century sometime or previous century, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's a remarkably, incisive statement, accurate statement. It really does take place that the moment you put power that is functional power, administrative power in the hands of people, it seems to corrupt them. And we believe in political systems, in administrative systems which give power to people. And so there is corruption happening through that. So that's one very major problem. Then is it, or a much simpler thing, is it that we love violence? Is it that violence continues because we just have this great desire for violence? That really does seem to be the case. We love competition. Human beings really seem to love competition. We love the feeling of beating somebody when there is an actual conflict. That feeling of defeating an opponent, whether it's in a sports game or in a real battle. So the love of excitement is very real. That adrenaline rush which we feel, and we can get addicted to that adrenaline rush. And just to give you an example of this, just the other day to one culture class, I was showing a video of Mussolini in the 1930s addressing a large crowd from somewhere high on the second floor of one building, a massive crowd of must be some 100,000 people, declaring war on the Allied forces. And you could see the excitement in the crowd, the kind of cheering. They seemed to be so happy, so they seem to have gotten into ecstasy at the declaration of war. It seems almost incredible. How is it possible for any group of people to feel pleasure and excitement when war is declared? And yet it is really so. You sense that sense of pride and whatever it is. And then there is a statement which I remember reading in this book, in this conversations which Krishnamurti and Krishnaji and Bohm and Scheinberg had. One statement which Scheinberg makes, he quotes a person who says, who was asked later by some reporter, why did you go to Vietnam to fight? And he said, if it's not Vietnam, it's every night at the bar. It's every night getting drunk. So there's a sense of utter boredom in life. And this love of excitement, this love of adrenaline, I think it's a very deep thing. Then we have the demand for identity. And you can see it happening in our own country. Fundamentalist forces, nationalistic forces, the desire for one-upmanship, one group trying to assert its superiority over another group, the tremendous desire to hold on to self-image, fear of losing face, honor killings. Just that very term itself tells you something. Honor killing, the shame of losing honor because somebody in your family did something which you consider shameful. So demand for identity has reached dangerous proportions here. And then there is the worship of success. We have in our country particularly a tremendous worship of success, a worship of accomplishment, a worship of personal fulfillment. Sorry, I said in our country, but actually it's there all over the world. But somehow we have a tendency to lose our dignity completely, particularly here in this country, when we are in contact with somebody who has accomplished a great deal. We just fall at the person's feet and so on. So demand for identity is yet another thing. Another point which I can say is we seem to be collectively obsessed with trivialities. And what are these trivialities? The simplest example is social media. If you consider the kinds of things which happen in social media, it's as if we spend hours and hours and hours in things which have utterly no significance. And that seems to be our great pleasure, whether it's gossiping or whatever. Then things which people may not consider trivialities, but I'm going to call them trivialities. We are addicted to the stock market. We are addicted to real estate, to speculation. We seem to have this tremendous love of gold. Fashion industry is one of the biggest industries around. And it's also, by the way, one of the most polluting industries in the world. And imagine what upholds the fashion industry. What is it that, people are so taken up by these things, and we don't realize the consequences that are happening in the world. The war on nature, the way we are, getting our scarce minerals, the scarce materials from some remote area and making life very difficult for the people there. Then obsession with our individuality, obsession with ideologies, with either political ideologies, economic ideologies, obsessions with concepts and ideals. And we are also in love with our own talent. And all these are separative factors between human beings. So now you may get puzzled why I have brought in this notion of talent. I'm going to explain that a little bit later. But it is a form of obsession. And I think the moment we give a great deal of importance to our own cleverness, our own accomplishment, I think our whole sense of proportion gets twisted. Just to give an example, think of, say, a couple of years back, there was this case where some very deadly poison, neurotoxin, was used by some Russian agents to kill somebody in the UK. Right? You may have remember that incident which happened a couple of years back. Now, the whole discussion which followed immediately after that is, who were the people, the political bosses in Russia who ordered this killing? What was the whole process by which it happened? But interestingly, almost nowhere, no place in the press, anywhere did I find a reference to the fact that that neurotoxin which was used must have originated in some laboratory. It must have originated in the work of some very clever chemist, perhaps. And we can ask ourselves, what made that person put his energies, put his brilliance into doing such a piece of work? We never seem to ask that question. We only ask it at the political level, and at the level of defense and systems and all that. But what makes a person do that? What makes a person value his own accomplishment, rising in that laboratory perhaps, his own brilliance? He may be so much in love with his own talents that he's going to make these neurotoxins and completely have no regard for the consequence of that, for the wider consequence. So you see this obsession with ourselves, obsession with our accomplishments, with personal fulfillment, obsession with talent, obsession with our own careers. These produce a tremendously narrowing effect in our consciousness, and we become completely unaware of the consequences on violence around the world. So these are all very important things. Now I'll give you another example. There is a well-known speaker these days called Yuval Harari, who has introduced this notion of fictional reality. He says that sometime back in our past, human beings started to do something which the animals cannot, which is that they create a reality which actually doesn't exist. It's a pure fiction. But that fictional reality has such a nature that everybody agrees to believe in it. And because of that, it seems like it is a real thing. And the best known such a thing is money. Money is by itself is a valueless thing. You just take a 1,000 rupee note. It's just a piece of paper. But we all agree that it has some value. We can buy things with it. Therefore, it actually does have value. It's an example of fictional reality. Now, that may be a useful fiction, but there are lots of other fictions. For example, you may have the nationalistic myth of a whole group of people. Now, that can be a very deadly fictional reality. Now, he has pointed out that this invention, which happened sometime in our past, has perhaps contributed to our evolutionary success, which is why we are our gigantic population across the earth. We have been amazingly successful in quotes. Maybe that success will destroy us actually, but it can be traced to the tremendous power of this fiction. And if you look at it, look at what money can do. It's a fiction, and yet what it does. Look at nationality. It's again a fiction. You cross from one country to another, nothing happens. You don't see any change in scenery, any change in the animals, nothing. And yet we have identified one as one nation, another as another nation, and it can lead to war. It can lead to tremendous death, destruction. Then you have fictions like the Constitution. It's just an agreement which you write on a paper, but it has great power. It has great consequence. Fictions like ideologies, the idea of justice and equality, idea of freedom, idea of God itself, heaven and hell. All these are ideas which we have generated at some distant time in our past, and we have evolved somehow a way of creating, communicating between ourselves in such a way that these things seem like they are very real. Now, it's interesting that he has used the term fictional reality. Well, in a way, it is very close to what Krishnaji calls thought. Or conditioning. He talks of the very ancient conditioning that we have in us. And this is part of it. This conditioning has become so real that it seems that we are unable to distinguish between that reality and what is actually there around us, reality and truth. So you see, for example, the whole problem of fundamentalism. Look at what is happening in Afghanistan. For the sake of some fantastic ideology, look at the consequences. This tremendous killing, they will deny girls education, and so on. There are all kinds of consequences. Or look at, for another interesting example, in the United States. They are always fighting about guns in the United States. Whether people should be allowed to have guns or not allowed to have guns. It's such a stupid debate, and yet it's a pure idea. It's something connected with some amendment in their own constitution. Now, here's an interesting example I'll give you, which is again a fiction. Here's a quote which was made in 1963 by a pope. He says, "Peace on earth, which man throughout the ages has so longed for and sought after, can never be established, never guaranteed, except by the diligent observance of the divinely established order." Now, look at there's a certain notion which has been introduced in that. So the observance of divinely established order. So we imagine something divine and we try to follow that. And then we hope that that's going to bring about order and that's going to bring about peace. It is that particular book, by the way, which was used for the title of Krishnaji's talk in the United Nations, Parchment Terrace, means peace on earth. And in contrast, he has made this statement when somebody asked him, is not belief in God necessary in this terrible and ruthless world? So he says, we have had belief in God for centuries, yet we have created a terrible world. The savage and the highly civilized priest believe in God. The primitive kills with bows and arrows, and the civilized priest blesses the warships and the bombers. Both of them believe. And also, there is a non-believer who resorts to liquidating those who stand in the way. Clinging to a belief or to an ideology does not do away with killing, with exploitation and oppression. On the contrary, there continue to be terrible wars and destruction and persecution in the name of peace and God. If we can put aside these beliefs and ideologies and bring about a deep change in our daily life, there will be a chance for a better world. It is our everyday life that has brought about these horrors. Our thoughtlessness, our exclusive national and economic privileges and barriers, and our lack of goodwill and compassion. And that quote ends with saying, worldliness will constantly erupt in chaos and in sorrow. And at another point, he has made that very famous statement that war is the spectacular and bloody projection of our daily living. We precipitate war out of our daily lives, and unless there is a transformation in ourselves, there are bound to be national and racial antagonisms, the childish quarreling over ideologies, the multiplication of soldiers, the saluting of flags, and all the many brutalities that go to create organized murder. So we have come is basically now to the question, what makes us hold on to these habits so strongly that peace becomes so remote, such a remote thing to even hope for? Why is our conditioning so hard in us that we are not willing to let go of it? Is it that we never see these facts? For example, there are certain facts, Krishnaji likes to use this word, that there are laws of human behavior, just like there are laws of like the law of gravity and the law of various laws in physics. There are laws of human behavior. One very important law is that all conflict arises from division and fragmentation. And I think it's very important for us to see this simple statement, the truth of this. It's a very simple statement, and yet it has a very deep meaning behind it. It's not only the division that exists at the political level, one nation versus another, one religious group versus another, but there could be division internally in a much more subtle sense. And this statement has much greater depth, much greater universality than we realize, that all conflict arises from division and from fragmentation. And then division and isolation inevitably lead to insecurity and conflict. So it goes both ways. So if there is division, if there is isolation it by itself does not sound like division, but isolation leads to division. The moment you isolate yourself, it leads to division and therefore to conflict. So you may ask now, what leads to isolation? Separation leads to isolation. Specialization of any kind leads to isolation. The moment you specialize, the moment we give ourselves a particular kind of name, a particular label, the moment we have separated ourselves in some way from the whole, that's going to lead to division. Another form in which separation comes about is pursuit of pleasure. And you'll notice that in today's world, with entertainment being given such high importance, entertainments, the sports industry, the pursuit of pleasure has become much more than ever before. It's like a whole industry in itself, the entertainment industry. Enormous amount of expenditure the worldwide. And pursuit of pleasure is is separative, it is isolating, and therefore it adds to this. And finally, perhaps the most subtle of them all is any form of pursuit of the unreal is going to lead to separation. And what is unreal? Unreal is that thing which Yuval Harari talked about when he said fictional reality. The moment we get excessively attached to these fictions, not realizing that those fictions may be just there for functional purposes like money, the moment you get too attached to them, it is going to separate you from that which is real, that which is living, that which has real vitality. And there's an interesting observation here which Krishnaji has made, that the living, that which is living always has more vitality than that which is unreal, which actually is which is not really living, fictional reality. And that is why perhaps this observation comes about, that the inner always overcomes the outer, because the inner, what lies inside us is living. All our surging, our desires, our conflicts, our wanting to do this, wanting to do it. It's a living thing. But outside us, we have established a kind of order based on systems, based on agreements, based on laws, which are not living things. We have based the outer order on an unreal thing. And that unreal thing we hope will bring about order in society. But inside us, there is the living, surging disorder, which has much greater vitality, much greater energy than the outer. So this is a very important observation, that pursuit of the unreal separates us from the real. It separates us from that which has vitality and life. So if we see all this, then where do we begin? Especially if, for example, I am in a school. What can one do to point this out so that children in their lives don't get attached to the unreal? Because it happens very, very easily, attachment to the unreal. How do we bring up children? How do we live so that we don't have this kind of attachment? Why is it that we get attached so easily? And is this what our ancients called Maya, this illusion around us, which becomes so real that you cannot distinguish between that and the truth? The Maya becomes the actual. We are unable to see what is transient and what endures, what cannot die. And this conditioning, I think, goes back to our very ancient past. It's not just some past couple of 100 years and so on. It's a very ancient thing. And I'd like to quote to you one song from our assembly's music. These songs sometimes have very beautiful lines. I think this is a verse which goes back to Kabir. He says, "Mat kar tu abhiman re bande, mat kar tu abhiman." And then the last two lines are very beautiful. It says, "Tere paas hai heere moti, mere man mandir mein jyoti, kaun hua dhanwan re bande." Look at the beauty of those lines. Tere paas hai heere moti, mere man mandir mein jyoti. So this is the basic question, which perhaps is so difficult to answer. Why do we get attached to the unreal? Out here, for example, we get so attached to material wealth. We get so attached to our own accomplishment. We get so attached to our name. We get so attached to symbols, to flags. For example, in this country, people have been killed for the sake of a flag. It seems almost unbelievable that it happened. How can there be so much attachment to an essentially unreal thing? So the word Jyoti is used in that verse, light. Where is one going to find that light? What is going to show that light to us? So I'm going to read out a few more quotes from Krishnaji. How am I doing with time, Dubeji?
You are quite on time. I think you still have about, let me see. You can still have, you have about 5-7 minutes more, and then we'll.
So he says, conflict and confusion result from our own wrong relationship with people, with things and ideas. And until we understand that relationship and alter it, mere learning, the gathering of facts and the acquiring of various skills can only lead to engulfing chaos and destruction. So notice he has used this very important line out here. Wrong relationship with people, with things and ideas. That's exactly it. That's the whole nature of attachment to the Maya around us. Can we understand that relationship has a wrong basis? It is not based on truth. So then he says, a school is a place where one learns the right place of knowledge. One learns the importance of relationship, which is not based on attachment. So relationship, not only to people, we all normally think of attachment only in terms of attachment to people, but it also can be attachment to things, attachment to ideas, attachment to my own reputation. So it can, relationship which is not based on attachment. It's a very extraordinary statement. And finally, a school is a place where one learns the art of listening and looking and learning. So how do we, these lines are packed with meaning, and we have to find a way of bringing these into the lives, our own lives and the lives of children. So, this question, so for example, there's a place in one conversation in California, one person asked him, what is the significance of the teaching of history in the education of the young? And basically he answered this: if you are the educator and I am the young student, how would you help me understand the whole nature of myself? Myself being the whole of humanity, my brain the result of million years. It is all in me, the violence, competition, aggressiveness, brutality, fear, pleasure, and the occasional joy and perfume of love. How will you help me understand all this? So he points out that history is not merely the history of empires and emperors and so on. It's also our own inward story. And can we learn all this? And then, I quoted that line of Kabir a moment back, and I used the word Jyoti, which is also a kind of inward richness. Inward richness is a phrase which you will find in the teachings quite a bit. What is inward richness? And he says here, if you are known all over the world, you feel very important. It gives you a sense of immortality. You want to be famous. You want to be known and talked about in the world, because inside yourself, you are nobody. Inwardly, there is no richness. There is nothing there at all. Therefore, you want to be known in the world outside. But if you're inwardly rich, then it does not matter to you whether you are known or unknown. Just see the similarity between what is being said here and what was said in those lines. To be inwardly rich is much more arduous than to be outwardly rich and famous. It needs much more care, much closer attention. If you have a little talent and know how to exploit it, you become famous. But inward richness does not come about in that way. To be inwardly rich, the mind has to understand and put away all the things that are not important, like wanting to be famous. Inward richness implies standing alone. So where does that leave us? It seems as though we are unable to see ourselves as we are. We are not able to see, we are so mired in our own illusions that we are not able to see ourselves as we actually are. So the word inward richness was used out here. But the reality of us is that maybe it is inward poverty. It's not inward richness. So when you ask, we can see, for example, that so long as we are identified with anything, so long as we have beliefs, so long as we have anything going on which separates us from the whole, there cannot be peace. So what is going to show us the light and break that kind of, see what we are doing for ourselves? So can we understand our own identifications? Can we understand and see our own emptiness? Is it possible to stay with that emptiness? So this is a question which I would like to ask rather than say, because I think it's a question for all of us. If we can see for ourselves that the essence of violence is this attachment to myself, this attachment to things which are not real, and that is itself me. When I say something is not real, all that is part of me. My ideologies, my attachment to some label, all that is me. And as long as I am attached to that, there cannot be peace. That's the seed of violence. If I have to be able to see that. So now the real question to me comes, what is the work that an educator has to do which will make such seeing possible for anyone? Is it that it just happens by chance? We just leave it to chance that a child will see it or not see it? Or can we actually do something which at least creates the atmosphere for it? I think we have to ask this question. It's a very serious and difficult question. And I'd like to end by giving you two quotes here. One by a person called Rachel Carson, who is one of the great naturalists of the last century. She wrote this famous book called Silent Spring, which in some ways began the environmental movement. And she has written here, I sincerely believe that for the child, it is not half so important to know as to feel. And she said, if facts are the seeds that later produce knowledge and wisdom, then the emotions and the impressions of the senses are the fertile soil in which the seeds must grow. So she is pointing also to the tremendous importance of relationship with nature and nurturing the art of listening, the art of seeing, the art of looking, and the art of learning. There's a close correspondence between what she's saying out here and what Krishnaji has said in so many different places. And then the last piece that I would like to is a quote from this Matter of Culture. It's a tiny little piece where a child asks him, why do birds fly away when I come near? It's a very beautiful childlike question. Why can't I come close to the birds? And he says, how nice it would be if the birds did not fly away when you came near. If you could touch them, be friendly with them, how lovely it would be. But you see, we human beings are cruel people. We kill the birds, we torture them, we catch them in nets and put them in cages. Think of a lovely parrot in a cage. Every evening it calls to its mate and sees the other birds flying across the open sky. When we do all these things to the birds, do you think they will not be frightened when we come near them? But if you sit quietly in an isolated spot and are very still, really gentle, you will soon find that the birds come to you. They hover quite close, and you can observe their alert movements, their delicate claws, the extraordinary strength and beauty of their feathers. But to do that, you must have immense patience, which means you must have a great deal of love, and also there must be no fear. Animals seem to sense fear in us, and they in turn get frightened and run away. That is why it is very important to understand oneself. Try sitting very still under a tree, but not just for 2 or 3 minutes, because the birds won't get used to you in such a short time. Go and sit quietly under the same tree every day, and you will soon begin to be aware that everything around you is living. You will see the blades of grass sparkling in the sunshine, the ceaseless activity of the little birds, the extraordinary sheen of a snake, or a kite flying high in the sky, enjoying the breeze without a movement of its wings. But to see all this and to feel the joy of it, you must have real quietness inside you. So let me stop here, Niveji. I'm going to leave it with this question for us, that what will make us see some of these illusions that we are living inside, which promote the continuation of the division and separation from the world and these attachments to unreal things. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Shailesh-ji. I think very beautifully placed. I think you have covered the whole gamut of violence. Krishna used to say that the purpose of his talks are not different than the purpose of establishing the schools which were established in his name. So I think it really places a very huge responsibility on the shoulders of teachers and parents to see how the child is growing in wisdom, whether he's sensitive. What is simplicity, as you mentioned? What is listening to somebody? What is being together and working together? These are issues which should be dealt at the school, because normally, schools don't talk about it. And unless we do that there, it will never be talked about. I'm very happy you have covered all that. And I see quite a few hands being raised. So I'll start with Harshad Bhai. Please unmute yourself, then we'll go to Aarti Walia.
Okay. Yeah. Are you able to hear my voice?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Shailesh. Very, very well. You have covered almost everything. What is the cause? What is the effect? So the real cause, it seems that there is a disorder in our mind, and we are not able to see it because we are too busy, and we go from one activity to another activity, and then there is no time where we can, like as Krishna ji says, sitting under a tree and observing the bird or the tree or the animals, and also observing what is going on within us. And I think in our culture, Upanishads, the fundamental question was asked, who am I? What is this? Am I the body? Am I the mind? Or there is something else? And as long as we identify ourselves with our body and mind, that means thinking is everything, then we cannot see the whole of our thinking. But there is a dimension other than thinking within us, which is not awakened. And that is what Krishna ji wanted to awaken in us, intelligence or awareness, which can see everything, what the thinking is doing. That means when there is an anger coming, to see that anger arising clearly. And that seeing is the action which stops, which doesn't multiply our thinking. So the teachings of Krishnamurti are going at the root of what we call I or me, which this I, how it arises. And Krishna ji says it comes from thinking. And then one has to really look at the thinking in a different way, not from thinking itself. And another thing which I want to say is if we can go away, far away from the earth, planet earth, and look at the earth, it's a very, very small planet, very insignificant planet. And on that, there are so many of us, billions of us. If we can have that kind of looking, even without going far away from the earth, but within our imagination, then maybe we can come to that sense that it is all meaningless to become somebody and to fight, to have quarrel, conflict about very small things. So what educators can do is to point out from where this thing comes: anger, fear, jealousy, loneliness, boredom. These are very important questions. And to look at such questions, one needs the freedom to look. And because we don't have the freedom, these questions, even like Krishnaji asking, how do you look at a tree? How do you look at your friend's face? These are very important questions, but one needs a real passion to look within, to see clearly. Then maybe we can do something with students. But even then, Krishnaji felt that not many people understood what he was talking about. So finally, it comes back to us. Are we really passionate to go at the root of what we call I or me? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ashok Bhai.
Mm.
Aarti ji, you want to ask something? Please go ahead.
Yes. Thank you, sir. It was a great talk. I just want to ask you that the impact of the fictional reality which Harare talks about is so tremendous in our lives, right from childhood to adulthood, that now we have become incapable to even see the actual reality. So the dividing line is completely blurred. So it is not only children, but even as adults, how do we come out of this power of fictional reality which has completely enveloped our lives, that we cannot even surpass it, even at an intellectual level? Even though, forget actually implementing it in our lives, but even at an intellectual level, even, the power of thinking and the overemphasis of thinking is so much that we have completely lost touch with reality.
Yes.
So how do you propose that there is a way out of this?
Yeah, what you have said is absolutely so. And I don't know if there's any way out, but if at all there is any hope, it has to come through education. And I think you will notice even in children, for example, the conditioning is so strong that from an early age, you begin to put your trust in a book, in a published book, rather than your own observation. If you see something and then a book or a newspaper says something different, you will believe that. You will say, oh, I must have seen something wrong. So we have become totally educated to not really giving importance to what we actually see ourselves, our original observation. And I think that's why this question of the art of looking comes, to be able to see very finely, to actually observe things with our own eyes, and to create a relationship with the world through actually our seeing. So it's not a relationship based on ideas, based on concepts, but a relationship based on our own direct contact. I think it has to begin there. When it has already advanced to a very great stage, conceptual stage, I think it's almost impossible to sort of go backtrack. We have to be able to, from an early age, give importance to original observation, something which a child experiences directly, sees directly, hears directly, comes into contact with in that manner. It has to begin there. So it's an immense task, I think. Even for a school, it's an immense task, let alone the whole of society.
Yes. If I may ask one more question, I'm a teacher in a school in Mumbai. It's a mainstream school. Now, of course, in schools and my son was a student of Rishi Valley when you were the principal. So, schools like Rishi Valley and Sahyadri and are wonderful setups where it is very easy to, in a way, I mean, the students are living in that environment. So it's very easy to connect to nature. But in a school like in Mumbai, okay, where they are in this mainstream education, the whole thing is all fictional reality. So, it's virtually a very impossible task to connect students at a younger age to, learn to observe and learn to learn from what they observe and feel. So, do you think there is any hope for students in cities like ours?
It's difficult to say. I think one has to just start very small. We have to start with ourselves to be able to, can we deny the unreal in ourselves? Can we deny it in our little relationships with those who are around us, then in our conversations with children? I don't think this can start at a big scale. It seems too deeply set in us for that to happen. It has to start small, and people have to talk about it, have to explore it together, what it means, because it is so subtle and so complex that unless we actually do it together, we may not be able to see it. It's essential that we create conversations amongst ourselves to explore this matter.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Before I go to Ravi from Uttarkashi, Shailesh ji, there is a question from Shakti ji from Rajghat. He can't speak, some problem with the audio, so I'll just read it out to you.
Yeah.
The man who was making that poison in the lab had concentrated on the task, so he missed thinking of consequences. Kay says there is an attention in which concentration is possible if and when needed. Would you like to say something about this attention, which doesn't exclude, yet makes focusing possible? To me, it seems a bit mysterious.
I think, yes, this is a very interesting question. How does it happen actually that it's focused on a task, one loses contact with the wider reality? I think one of the important factors is one identifies with it. There's a personal identification with it. It is connected with my own fame. It's my accomplishment, my career. I become invested in that task. So I don't just see it for an interesting task in itself. It becomes part of my desire to make some statement to the world. I think if I don't have that kind of identification, then I do something, I'm not then personally attached to it. I am able to see its significance, even though I may appreciate it, it may have intellectual beauty and so on, but I am able to see how it connects with other things. I'm not completely lost in that. You see, that's the whole thing. We have a tendency to get obsessed with particular things, and we have to understand that the nature of that obsession. Does it come out of a personal attachment to a particular activity because it is somehow connected with our sense of myself, my future, my career, how I'm thought of by other people? I think if one doesn't have that kind of attachment, one doesn't have that kind of identification, there's a possibility of seeing beyond it. You don't just get caught in that one thing. Yes, you may do it while it is there. When we are actually in the middle of building a house, yes, we may be giving all our attention to whatever, the various aesthetic aspects, engineering aspects. But we are able to then step away and see the other consequences, and consequences on the environment, whatever, something else, how it maybe affects something in some tree around the place. I don't know, one can explore that. I would say a very crucial aspect in that question is our own sense of identification with what we do. And that has become a great habit with us, that we identify with our own accomplishments. And the whole structure of society has made us go in that direction. We win prizes, we win awards, we win our name based on what we do. So we get very strongly identified with our own activities.
Thank you, Shailesh. Thank you. Yes, Ravi, please go ahead. Ravi from
Yeah.
Uttarkashi. Yeah.
It was very great talk. All your words created riots within my body cells and brain cells and created an energy which I am not able to understand. Actually, the words separation, isolation, the sentence leads to division. Actually, in last 8-10 years or decade, I had been trying myself to avoid this situation because all these hatred, media, and my friend, brainwashed friend, had created confusion and frustration within me that I am not able to convince them that this hatred, this nationalism, this Hinduism is taking us nowhere. And I was not able to convince a single soul. So I isolated, separated myself from those souls, and I had no contact with my friends last decade. But your words that isolation takes to division still created a riot. That should I get out and speak to those people and try again to convince them that this hatred is not good for themselves but this country and humanity, or should I work upon myself, my own mind, which Krishnamurti says you cannot change the world unless you change your own thing. Unless you find the truth. Thank you.
Well, your question, I think, is very real. And it's a question for me also. I'm not sure I can answer it. I can only explore it along with you. But I think because there is conflict in the world, there may be we may feel a strong urge to sort of just to escape from the world, to go and live in some remote area and not be connected with it at all. I'll give you an example of such a situation which happened, one very famous instance. There was a great mathematician of the last century, extremely great mathematician, who had a great impact on the mathematics of the last century. And he is from France. At some point, he discovered that the salary that the people they were in that institute were getting all came from the defense industry. Now, this upset him hugely. So he left that institute, a very prestigious institute, and tried to find a place where his salary would not come from any defense place. But he found gradually, he tried different places, and no place he could find which was free of this. Every place, one way or the other, whether through taxes and all, he found he was getting involved with the defense industry. So he decided to completely get out of society, and he went and just built a little hut for himself in the Pyrenees mountains, which is the mountains between Spain and France. And he lived the rest of his life out there. And all his fellow mathematicians were completely astonished that a person who was like a Nobel Prize winning, that kind of caliber, just completely left the subject and decided to go and leave society and go and live all on his own, because he couldn't bear this, having that he is in some way involved and supporting and giving legitimacy to the defense industry, to the arms industry. France, for example, is a country which has a huge arms trade. It sells a lot of arms to other countries. So it is actually contributing to a great deal of violence. He didn't want that. Now, is that a solution? It's not really a solution. It may be a solution for that person. Yes, he walks away from this mess, and he sort of keeps away from it. But the problems in the world continue. They are not going to stop by my going and living in the Himalayas or going to some North Pole or something. So unless I am prepared to talk with people who are around me and face all the difficulties in the process, I cannot actually make much of I can't do anything else. So it seems to me that that cannot be the answer. though it may be very painful, I think we need to plunge into actual conversation in our own relationships. We have to explore this, however difficult it may be. It may bring us into conflict with our fellow beings, but then we have to work our way through that conflict so that it does not take root. It's a difficult thing. I don't know. Given the direction in which, for example, this country is going, it is extremely difficult to not get into conflict right now. But I think the answer cannot be to simply walk away and sort of go and live in some, like go to the North Pole or something. So that's my answer, Ravi. It's not really an answer, but because I'm myself exploring this. It's not as if I have been able to come to a clear resolution of that question.
Thank you, Shaileshji. I think we have Mr. Mukesh Anand. Yes, Mukeshji, please go ahead. Then Shiv Kumar.
Yes, yes, sir. Can you hear me, sir?
Mhm.
Am I audible?
Yes,
Yes.
you are. Yes.
Thank you, Shaileshji, for such an enlightening lecture that you have given to us with all the quotes. I want to ask you a question about fictional reality that you have discussed. Fictional reality, I can understand because I am an author also. I have written 3 books and some of them have been fictions. J. Krishnamurti. Recording is the nature of the mind. It is the quality of our brain that it records the things that happens. So sometimes I am surprised by the fictions that I've written, from where it came from in my mind. So what I wanted to ask the question, as he has said, that if you completely observe yourself, then perhaps those age-old thoughts and the consciousness that we have, the whole consciousness of humanity is it's not our individual consciousness. It's the consciousness of whole humanity, as he says, the quality of how much is the observation important in neutralizing those conditioning and consciousness and having an order, which he says that order has to be there before we go into some kind of meditation, and then we are at peace with ourselves.
I think observation is absolutely key. It is only through observation that one actually sees something. Because, see, let's look at all these things which we've been talking about. Let's say the attachment to something unreal. We have, let's say, there's a very strong conditioning in me in which I'm attached to some symbol. How will I even come to know that? It's not by somebody telling me. It doesn't make any effect on me at all. You'll notice that if somebody just tells you something, it just, that thing just
Correct.
rolls off. It has no power at all. But to actually see myself, see that attachment operating, which means I'm attached to a certain symbol, then one day you come and you mock that symbol, or you point at it and dismiss it, or it's lying on the floor and you put your foot on it, you just mock, you make a sort of literally, figuratively tear it up, and I get upset, I get angry. That reveals something. The moment I get angry, the moment I react to something around me, if I have the intelligence, I will be able to see my own reaction, because that reaction is telling me something. Unfortunately, what often happens is that we get just carried away in that reaction, and you do something, I do something to you, and that just goes out of control. But every reaction that we have reveals some kind of an attachment that is there in us. If we were not attached, we would not react. We would not get upset at something. Attachment to a flag, attachment to a particular book, attachment to a particular anything.
Person.
Yeah. Any, the moment you are it shows you your own identification.
Yeah, sure. I wanted to tell you one thing, like most of us who are discussing about K are attached to him in some way or the other, rightly or wrongly. And it happens that when somebody says it is useless, we do talk to other persons. I have referred it to many persons. And sometimes you have that anger in you because you get attached to him also. So once we observe that, and we have to internalize it ourselves, as you said, that we are all are exploring it in various directions.
Quite right. So we may have fallen into that trap ourselves. That is, K has become more of a symbol. We like the sound of what he says. We like the sound of his words or the whatever, and we get attached to that, and it sort of just stops there. It doesn't penetrate into our life any further. We can just and then we react because somebody criticizes. We don't like it.
Yeah.
So this is a very dangerous thing because it can have very deadly consequences, as we can see happening in our own country right now. Somebody makes a wrong statement, he can pay with his life for nothing.
Thank you, Shailesh. Thank you. Mr. Shiv Kumar, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Dubeyji. Shailesh, your talk, the flow was so good. I felt there was a dialogue going on, but then we got into Q&A and I felt it's a kind of discussion, including my question also.
Mhm.
What I feel, if we keep aside the language and money, how would it be? Even in terms of observation, listening, if I can move beyond language, don't you feel like, you're very close to nature, very close to everything? Thank you.
If you go beyond language, yes, that I think is an art which we have to learn for ourselves, to be able to see something not merely through the words, because you see, verbal reasoning has become so powerful in us that it has taken the place of actual seeing. So we deduce something logically, and that somehow convinces us that we have actually seen something. And I think partly it has happened because of the tremendous success, you can say, of our whole verbal reasoning for the past maybe thousands of years. It has replaced our ability to see something at first hand. It's a very strange thing how it has happened, but intellectual level seems to have has knocked out our own seeing. I think it's up to us to see that now. There's no real nothing else which can be said. We have to be able to see that thing for ourselves.
Thank you, Shailesh. We have Mr. Raj Shekhar. Please go ahead. Mr. Raj Shekhar.
Yes, sir. Namaste, sir. Shailesh, sir. After 2 years, I am able to see you. Very nice. Sir, the general, I am talking general aspect. After the pandemic, we are not able to meet for annual gatherings. But in Hyderabad now we have started 2 months back monthly gatherings. Why not, sir? We are expecting from Sahyadri. This time Sahyadri is due. Last year it could not take place. Is there any possibility, sir, to have a gathering at Sahyadri this year?
This year, I'm unfortunately not yet. I think everything is so uncertain right now. Every possible schedule has got sort of knocked out. We have lost all control of our schedules. I think we have to recover all those schedules now. Our own schooling itself is all the whole rhythm has gotten upset.
Yes, sir.
So we are not right now in a position to organize any gathering. In fact, right now we don't even have a vacation break for the students. They have just come back to school, having been away for such a long time. So the hostels are all filled with the students only. So let's hope we can organize next available opportunity.
Sir, schools have getting started now?
Yes, they are starting now. Yes.
Yeah, nice, sir. Actually, online education is something different. And going to a school, staying with all friends and other, and spending with the teachers, that is different. And real education comes with that spending together. Sir, next there is one small question also. Recently, I am totally getting disconnected from this politics because I'm not able to see any hope in the politics, how they are proceeding and all that. Mostly I am getting connected with the nature and flowers and all those things. But there is, I am strongly secular, but there is one small thing. Recently a doubt has come. Okay, secular is the best way of living, no doubt. But at the same time, the Shariat law is getting imposed here and there. That is what we are saying. Sir, what is the solution for this? At least that should not take place. That is totally obstructing the freedom of the entire people, and so many other things. Violence is increasing. Sir, is there any way?
I didn't get your law. What is being imposed on people? Sorry?
Chariot laws. Is that what you meant? Mr. Rajshekhar?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You now say recently in Afghanistan, what has taken place?
Okay. You're referring to that. Well, it is part of I think the madness which is happening all over the world, this attachment to things. It's again the same phenomenon happening. You get, but of course, it's important that we don't see that whole thing just in isolation. It's not just a single phenomenon. It is connected with the whole what's happening in the world. The whole greed of empires. For example, I mean, that's a different discussion. I don't know if we want to get into it here, but it's not a complete coincidence that fundamentalism is beginning to assert itself in certain areas. It is connected with the whole world events, the greed of other countries. You look at just that one country, Afghanistan. Don't just look at what is happening right now. Look at what has happened over the past few hundred years. And you'll see how it has become like a plaything of empires. The British Empire used to call it the Great Game. They invented a term, the Great Game. It was all a game to them, just trying to capture that place, and it became a battleground between the Russian Empire and the British Empire. So if it has just been caught in, it's been sort of just wrecked by greed. And that combined with this whole thing of this excessive attachment to religious symbols and religious texts, I think it has become like a terrible poisonous combination. But you see, the historical element has to be understood, and how we have created all these conditions through our own activities, our greed, our desire to dominate, our desire to capture things for ourselves. We can't underestimate, for example, the violence which is taking place in the United States. It is not just, you don't just look at it as something happening right now. It's a reflection of whole of man's activity which has happened. And that's very important to see how that violence is a created situation. It's an attachment. It is a result of centuries and centuries of greed and aggressiveness, wanting to capture territory, wanting to assert one's identity. It's a worldwide problem, and we can see very clearly from this that this is not a problem. When Krishnaji says you are the world, that the consciousness of man is the whole consciousness which is affected in this matter. These problems are not just arising in one particular pocket. These things are created at a very large scale across both time and space. And it shows it, in a way, it creates in us an awareness of our own responsibility, how we are not just operating for ourselves, doing something just for ourselves. It is connected with a much larger question.
Thank you, Shailesh. I have 4 people raising hands and we have about 6 minutes. So may I request everyone to please be very, very brief. Durga ji, please. Then Pradeep ji, then Dinesh ji, and then Harshad bhai. Yeah, Durga ji, please.
Okay, sir. Yeah. Yeah. I hope I'm audible, I think. Yeah?
Yes, you are. Yes.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Shailesh ji. Yeah, it's very nice listening to you. Your intensity and sensitivity can be very well perceived also. I just have to say a few things, sir. You spoke, like major part of your talk was dedicated towards, the collective consciousness of what's happening in the world. Definitely world, I think at any given point of time, it has all the facets. People living in the or ancient centuries also, they must have found violence everywhere. It is what you perceive and how you perceive. And definitely there are no two doubts, two versions that, the world is going to be violent and it is going to be downside, the rich countries becoming more powerful and all that. So there is no end to that. So somewhere I think one has to sort out these things in oneself. That's what the underlining message I could get from Krishnaji's books. There's one point I would like to say. One more thing, sir, like as being a teacher, I think mostly you have said something to deal with the students. You brought most of the student and teacher relationship good often. So that also gives me this question, though I also had been a teacher for the major part of my life, but I think more than being a teacher and how we impart to the students, first of all, as a human being, can I live my life, with not having a conflict in my life and with not frittering away my energy, whatever limited energy resources I have got into trivialities. Because when I start doing that, then only I can have, my freedom and state of mind to go into more deeper things. I think that is the basis and fundamental. I think all the 60 years of Krishnaji's work, it wants us to push gently towards that. And somewhere we have to draw a line where we have to put this world outside. And let me just look at myself, what kind of life I'm leading. This is one more thing, sir. And just one last point. You said something about inward richness and poverty. So we can come back to Krishnaji's books. It says, not bother about poverty, not bother about the riches. First of all, are you aware of your inward poverty? First of all, becoming aware of that inward poverty itself is a secret. So we need not take two statements that Krishnaji has said himself. Conditions are so much. You can't go to the positive without sorting out your negative things in you. So that's what I had to say, sir. That's all. Otherwise, it's a wonderful talk and good session, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes,
Thank you.
Pradeep, please.
Yeah. While listening to Shailesh, I was some thoughts were crossing my mind, and one dilemma which has come is, Kay has talked about we are being conditioned and a lot of ignorance-based beliefs are there in society. Actually, there's a massive ignorance. Now, if I'm working on myself and learning from all the people, Krishnaji, and also on my own reflection, then as I keep removing the illusions and as I gain better insights and understanding, I am becoming misfit in this world. So I am a misfit in this world, and this dilemma was raised by Ravi, that how do I deal with it? So this dilemma is going to come in a person who's going to work on himself or herself. So so I see there are two kinds of people: illusion free, who have understood the reality relatively much more and the normal world which is full of illusions, including money and whatever, all kinds of illusionary. The entire legal structure, the entire social structure is based on those illusionary beliefs. So I am bound to be misfit in this world, and I am. So what is my coping strategy? Let me share what is my coping strategy. So my coping strategy is there is a huge disorder in this world, and behind that order is the great intelligence which is running this universe. And so-called disorder, which is my interpretation, calling it disorder is also my word. I am judging it as disorder. So that is an essential part of that order, and so that intelligence is much more, and that I am seeing through disorder a lot of good things are coming out. When people are disturbed, they try to find solution, and a lot of creativity also comes up. So my coping strategy is I trust that intelligence of the universe to do whatever, and I keep working on my removing my illusions and getting in touch with my reality. And so I have maintained a very, kind of a situation where when I'm in the world, when I'm in the world, I try to follow their norms, but I don't belong there. I live in my own world of which is the reality I live in, and I also like to relate with people who have like this is my way of relating with people who are working on themselves in this kind of a setting where people are discovering. So I'm telling you, you are bound to be misfit if you are going to work on yourself and work and realize the understanding of Krishnamurti, and you'll have to find the coping strategy for that. So I don't really give much botheration about the negativity and all those happening in the world. So I trust that intelligence, and all through this history, a lot of negativity has happened, but ultimately the world is progressing tremendously. So I'm very optimistic, hopeful, and that's how I cope with it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Dinesh ji.
Sir, are you able to listen to me?
Yes.
Yes, yes, yes.
Sir, my views are very different on this. Basically, whatever you are saying, violence or greed or we talk of any fear or this thing, these are not conditioning. These are the basic instincts in the man. And even those are available in animals also. So these are going to happen, and conditionings are only either trying to control it or enhance it. So this conditioning is also a mankind's endeavor to just make the things in order or to make the things better. Basically, I and say for myself, and I'm Mr. Shailesh, both are different. Both are having different traits of personality. Then there is bound to be a conflict because our interests are different. I would like to see the world in my own views and in my way, and Shailesh ji might see the world in their own way, and they want to do the things in their own way. So there is bound to be conflict, and there is bound to be violence. Now, what is the solution? Solution seems to be only what, as the case says, if there is a freedom from either myself as well as Shailesh ji, then only there will be, say, order, which is having mostly the peace in between us. But this again, everybody will be free from the I, seems to be another idealism or another what should be. So basically, whatever the mankind has done, they have tried to make the systems to just control this violence and other vices, and just to try to flower the goodness and all that. That is the only way. How can it is only really a challenge that how the this educationist and other people who flower the goodness in the young people and young students. So I think we are not going in the wrong direction. We are going in the right direction. Only thing, only the question is how we can flower the goodness in everybody. That is the real challenge which Krishnamurti was, in my views, tries to develop. Because freedom from Maya for everybody is again idealism. Thank you. What shall
Okay, okay, we'll have the last word from Harshad Bhai. Please go ahead.
Okay. Human beings were not created by human beings. Evolution of life was not done by human beings. So it seems to me that there could be something else which is controlling the whole future of humanity. And what we as an individual, we can understand ourselves and be free from the problems which we create for ourselves by going beyond thinking, because thinking does not solve our problems. Like Krishna ji also said, thinking is the problem. So there is a dimension other than thinking, awareness, if we can come to it. But when we talk about the whole of humanity, I don't think we have control. Maybe something else looking into the whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Arshad bhai. Thank you. I think we have come to the end of the talk now. I want to thank Shailesh ji for being with us today, and hopefully we'll have him in the future sometimes whenever he is available. And I want to announce our talk for the next Sunday. Next Sunday we have Professor Hilary Rodrigues. He is Professor of Comparative Religion in a university, Lethbridge University in Canada. To accommodate his time, we'll have the talk at 9 a.m. So next Sunday, our talk starts at 9 a.m. You're all welcome to join. With these words, I want to close it now. And once again, thanks Shailesh ji for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks to all. Please close it.